Hello, my name is Heather Burke, and this is my screencast for PIDP 3250, Tips and Strategies. And today I will be talking about tips and strategy number 6, promote student autonomy. So what is student autonomy? Well, it's not a new concept. In fact, they've been talking about it in education for decades. In 1981, Henry Hollick defined it as autonomy is the ability to take charge of one's own learning. Learner autonomy has nothing to do with letting students do whatever they want. Rather, it focuses on letting them discover that they are responsible for their own learning. You need to think of student autonomy as a learner-centered approach to education. And there's many different ways that you can define a learner-centered approach. And I've only chosen 4 today so that this doesn't get too long. And the 4 items that I've chosen to focus on in today's screencast are the following. Make instructional goals clear to the learner. Have the learner set realistic goals. Encourage learner choice. And to evaluate learning, which is self-reflection. So let's go through each of these one by one and determine how an instructor can do this. Well, the first item I talked about was to make instructional goals clear to the learner. Now, this refers to our learning outcomes or our learning objectives. And it's very important that an instructor has clear and concise learning objectives that are clearly posted in the course. And it's important to have these because you need to think of objectives as tools that you will use to help you reach your goals. They're the arrows you shoot towards your target. And why this is important is that it helps the student understand why they're learning each of the items in the course material, and it keeps the instructor on track. Now, the next item we'll talk about is learners set realistic goals. And the following is a quote from Yogi Berra. If you don't know where you're going, you'll end up someplace else. So how can an instructor help students set goals? Well, one important thing is to give students time to do this. Perhaps this is at the start of the first lesson or near the beginning of the term or even throughout the term, having set aside hours within the class time for students to write down a few goals that they might have for the course. Now, the third item I'm going to talk about is encourage learner choice. Now, a student will feel empowered when you give them a choice in their method of learning. And an empowered student is an engaged student, and engaged students tend to have higher degrees of learning. Now, how will we give a student choice in learning? I personally found this difficult when I teach science, a required course that has very specific learning outcomes. They can't choose not to learn a subject, but what I discovered is that they can choose how to learn the subject. So for me, one easy way of providing choice is to offer them lots of different types of review work, and some of those might be listening to my lectures, screencasts that review the more difficult concepts, group work in class, hands-on activities, or for the people that prefer just to read textbook readings that they can do to review the subject. Students will gravitate towards the form of learning that they prefer best, and they'll do that to review the course material, and they'll enjoy having that choice and having the ability to choose which works best for them to learn the material. What's important is that when you give a student choice in how to learn, the learning outcomes are still the same. So whether they choose to write an essay or interview someone or read a textbook, at the end, they're all at the same level of knowledge. They just chose how to get there. And then the last step I wanted to talk about is to evaluate learning. This is self-reflection. And self-reflection is a very important aspect of learning because it creates opportunities for students to celebrate their strengths and address areas of weaknesses. And I just wanted to point out that celebrating success is extremely important to help motivate our students. I find this extremely important in our lab courses where we have students performing ultrasounds on each other, and they tend to focus on what they are struggling at, focusing on what they're not doing well. And if they can take a moment to realize what they've learned and how much they've come in such a little amount of time, it's extremely motivating for the student to realize that they are progressing and reaching their goals. And addressing their areas of weaknesses will also help them set goals for future learning. It'll identify the areas they need to work on and how they can get there. To summarize, today we talked about 4 items. Make instructional goals clear to the learner. Learner set realistic goals. Encourage learner choice. And evaluate learning self-reflection. Now, this is only a short list. There are many other ways that you can achieve student autonomy. Just remember that the goal is to engage our students and motivate them. And this is just one way to help motivate our students. But I hope that you learned something from watching my screencast. Thank you very much for taking the time to watch. Have a good day.